Is it all right if I digress for a second? Because I think an important point to make is that, I'm Australian, guilty as charged, and a lot like the Scots and, the English, we've been taught to repress our emotions, and you go to school, there's a classic Australian expression, which is, take a teaspoon of cement, right? That's what they say to boys. And so I basically didn't cry for a good, 30 plus years of my life. And I was living in LA. I just made my first show, which had the likes of Jason Sudeikis, aka Ted Lasso in it. Life was going great. I get a phone call one day from my sister on repeat, and she's been to the doctor with my mum, and she's been diagnosed with a rare form of dementia called FTD, which Bruce Willis has. And my mum's in pieces, and she's saying she's scared, and it was messed, right? It was super, super messed up. And around that time, the point of that story is I broke, right? For the first time in years, I cried my guts out. And it was like a dam had been opened up inside me. And my friend in Sydney, one of my best friends, said, I've got a friend coming to LA. She's a writer. Would you have brunch with her? And when you're living in LA, there's just a constant stream of Aussies coming through town. She came over for brunch. We got on like a house on fire. We were pissed on mimosas by 11 a.m. And as she left, she said, would you read my script for me? And so the only thing more cliche than yet another Aussie coming to LA that you've got to have a brunch with is them asking you to read their script. So very patronizingly, I was like, yeah, sure, I'll read your script. And I sat down that night and I thought, I'll just open the first couple of pages, and I read it and I was like, oh yeah, predictable rom-com. And then in the 5th minute, the lead male dies. And this girl goes on this incredible quest to marry him posthumously. And she has to overcome the law of the land and her family's objection and public opinion to try and win the right to marry him posthumously. And I grew up part of my life in France. And the French are, I guess, a lot more romantic than us. And in France, it's not an unheard of thing, a posthumous marriage. You have to apply to the president, and if he gives you permission, you can marry someone after they're dead. And I read this script, and I laughed my ass off, and I bawled my eyes out, especially the ending. And I'd never really had that with the script. I've been doing rom-coms. That's kind of my life's passion and work, but one that actually makes you cry was, to me, extraordinary. So I call her up the next day and I said, hey, classic LA move, let's have brunch, right? That's what people do in LA. And we sat down, and I thought I'd discovered this diamond in the rough, and said to her, look, I want to produce this for you. I want to direct it. I think this movie is amazing. And she said, that's awesome, thank you. I've got an incredible producer on this called Dan Hine, who originated the idea and hired me to write it. You'll have to pitch him. And so I was like, what? And then I'd never asked her what she was doing in town, but she had a show that so very nearly was got up, and as happens in LA, had fallen apart at the last second. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So I met with Dan. We fell in work love. We're still very much in work love, as am I with Melissa, who's an incredible writer. And here we are, 3 years later, and thank God Edinburgh picked our film, and we're about to debut it tonight. I mean, my life's mission is to help people laugh about the tough stuff. I know that sounds so pretentious, and every time I say it, I feel like a wanker. But it's true. That's what I want to do, and that's what I try and do every time I make anything. And I'm not gonna lie, I got dumb lucky, like incredibly dumb lucky. because we got introduced to this amazing actress called Aisling Bea, and she is the hands down the best actor I've ever worked with. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. Like, she is amazing. She's so funny, and dramatically, she's just, I mean, what an instrument she has, the power that she brings to a performance, and she can flip. That's such an extraordinary thing to be able to do, you know? I mean, there's a handful of people that I can think of that have that capability to be that funny and that dramatic, you know? I mean, like, big one to call out, but like Robin Williams was like that, right? You know, Good Will Hunting. So Aisling was really, she was the Rosetta Stone to unlocking the tone of the film, and her performance anchors it. And, you know, I was laughing earlier telling the story that when I was decided, you know, I was gonna stop being a journalist and start making comedies, I read everything there was to read from directors that I loved. And I read Sidney Lumet's book on directing. And he talked about the fact that he was on set watching Al Pacino in And Justice for All, and that his famous speech in that made him bawl his eyes out the camera. I remember reading it at the time going, I can't imagine crying in front of everyone on set. And sure enough, Aisling just broke me, you know, and I found myself at times, you know, beyond moved and in pieces. I think that for me personally, my quest in making the film, because, you know, making a movie is really, really, really effing hard. You know, TV, you walk in, you pitch, it's yes or no, right? And you really have to love making movies to want to do it, because it's so much harder. And so I was on this quest because on January 30th, 2022, my mum actually died, not of the dementia. She died of COVID. And 7 days later, I got a phone call saying Universal want to make you a movie, and I embarrassed myself terribly on the phone to my manager because I hadn't told him that my mum was dying. And I really feel like she was the one who, I know it sounds hokey and hippy-dippy, but I felt like her presence was there helping me, you know, making it happen. And so I went full steam ahead on getting this movie made, you know, and we came so close so many times, as I'm sure all filmmakers do, to the film falling apart, to the point where we lost a key member of cast, you know, who's an extraordinary actor, and but they got offered Marvel money, so who can blame them? They were getting paid more than the entire budget of our film. But my wonderful producer Dan and I had to basically just decide to sink our fees more or less into getting the film made. And so we plunge on, we hit the last day of shooting, and have you ever lost someone? One of the worst things about death is of a loved one is that things become very commercial and very impersonal. And so having gone through that with my mum, it was something that I wanted to put into the script. And there's a sequence in the film where, much like I did with my mum, you go through a ring binder and you go, all right, let's do these flowers. Let's do this headstone. What do you think of the finish on this coffin? And it was a macabre and absurd experience to go through in real life. And because I am clearly an idiot, we scheduled it for the last scene on the last day. And I just, you know, there's so many practicalities in making a movie, I didn't think about it at the time. And Aisling gave an incredible performance watching her parents pick out the coffin. as played by the wonderful Sinead Cusack and Peter Egan. And then we called cut. And it was like the last thread that was holding me together just got pulled out of me. And much like Gemma's quest to marry the love of her life posthumously, it was my tribute to my mum. And when all of a sudden there was nowhere to go, of course there's lots of other things about to happen, but at that moment of wrapping, I fell apart, you know. And Aisling was admittedly wonderful that day, you know, when I looked like a complete idiot, sobbing my guts out. Yeah. I wish I could say we had a master plan when we set out to cast. That we were ingeniously, we thought, let's only pick people who have, you know, a connection with grief. They'll be the ones that we should hit up. But it happened by osmosis, and all of a sudden, one day we realized the pattern that had happened. Because you send it to a lot of people, you know, cast and crew wise when you're looking. And the first person who came on board was Billy Lord. And Billy is an extraordinary person who's had a life that none of us are ever going to be able to understand, right? I mean, her mum is Princess Leia. And when I did the call with Billy, she was talking to me, you know, very intimately about what it felt like to lose her mum, Carrie Fisher, and her grandmother, Debbie Reynolds, in a 48-hour period. And I don't think that, you know, I don't think you can underrate her strength to be able to push through that. So she was our, you know, our foundation stone that we built everything else out on. And one day Billy calls me and she goes, I've got fantastic news, but you're not going to like it. And I said, okay, so here we go. And she said, I'm pregnant. I said, that is amazing. And she goes, I'm going to have to drop out of the film. I really don't want to, but I want you to get this film made, and I think I'm going to get in the way. And I said, well, we can't make this movie without you. I can't imagine doing it with anyone else, because you are, you know, we literally, by this stage, we've written the role around her. And so we thought about it overnight. And she came back with this idea. I first said, look, I don't really care that you're pregnant. Let's just do it, right? Like, this isn't the 1920s. We're not firing people for being pregnant. You know, that's gross. And she said, well, I've had an idea. What if I'm a surrogate? Because I'm going to butcher this, and I need to Google it, but I'm pretty sure it's her sister is a surrogate. Was born from a surrogate. But either way, her sibling was born from a surrogate. And so she had experience with surrogacy and was quite close to the surrogate mother of her sibling. And we just said, this is amazing. Like, it was a bolt of lightning. And thematically, it just made so much sense for the film, because it's a film about messed up families. And I mean, like, all families are messed up, right? And this one just gave it a whole other dimension that I hadn't seen before in the surrogacy. And I love to say, and I stand by this, there has never been a better performance, comedic performance, from a 7-month pregnant woman in the history of cinema, right? Like, never happened. I mean, Frances McDormand was wearing a pillow in Fargo, right? And if you rewatch the film, you'll see that Billy is sitting in nearly every shot, because she was so pregnant. And we got her on the plane on the last day where she was legally allowed to fly. And I love her to bits for it. So that was Billy. Then Aisling is an extraordinary person as well, has such character and such strength and such empathy. And she talks very openly about losing her father at the age of 3. and how it shaped her, and how it made her, as she puts it, want to be a clown. And she brings that to every scene, you know, and it was so, I'll never forget, I was thinking of giving her a note on a scene about grief. I was thinking about it. And she could see that I was about to come over and give her a note. And she just looked at me and she said, "Don't, I've got this." And of course, I mean, it's so accessible for her, you know. And that's the thing about grief. It is something that stays with you forever. And you know, some days you are rock solid and some days you're paper thin. And then the final piece of our triumvirate was Colin. And, you know, we think of Colin Hanks as someone who's lived this blessed life, right? I mean, his father is a global treasure. You know, if you don't know who Tom Hanks is, please try and come out from underneath the rock where you've been living and watch some TV, because he's one of the greats, if not the greatest of his generation. And so you think, oh, well, Colin's just had this charmed life. But the thing is, Rita Wilson isn't his mother. And he too has his own connection with grief, because he lost his mother in his late teens, early 20s. So once we had that core, then everything else just fell into place. And it just, again and again, Susan Wokoma lost her father when she was 19. Samuel Barnett's father was the first person to die of COVID in the UK. And, you know, cast and crew, my Oscar-winning, Oscar-nominated editor, Matt Villa, who was coming off of Elvis, is now doing Ron Howard's new movie and had no business being involved in our little indie, connected with it because he'd lost his parents and his brother within the space of 12 months. Or Murren Tullett, our incredible cinematographer who lost his mother to cancer very shortly before filming. Omari Douglas, whose father died during shooting. So it was this unfortunate bond that connected us all. But that sounds like it could be something really depressing, right? And I think the other thing that was so important to all of us was that this wasn't a film where you come away going, well, grief is going to break me. You know, this is a film that puts its arm around your shoulder and says, grief sucks, but it happens to us all. And helps you laugh through the tears, because again and again, when I've talked to people about this film, and I've been lucky enough to travel around the world when we were doing testing and see it on 3 different continents, New York, London, and Sydney, people kept sharing their stories about how their grief and how they laughed at moments, you know, these odd little moments. Because I guess it's like, if you've ever been to a church service which is very solemn and you get the giggles and it's the most inappropriate time to laugh, that is when things are funniest, when you're not allowed to laugh. And it feels taboo to say in Anglo-Saxon culture, but there is something funny about grief. There is something to be celebrated in those moments, you know. And obviously some people have experiences with grief which are just beyond the pale, and I can't talk to them. But for the rest of us, it's there are moments where you're going to laugh. One of the great pleasures of the shoot was the day we shot Colin's funeral, the character Nathan's funeral. We were very, very quiet on set, very solemn. We were trying to create an atmosphere where the actors were able to bring the emotion to their performances. And, you know, Billy absolutely broke my heart that day, watching her. But one of the key scenes of the film is this funeral. And we'd written, Melissa Bubnich, my incredible screenwriter, had written this amazing scene for a life celebrant. And when we were throwing around ideas of who that person could be, I am a huge Dennis Pennis fan. I don't know if anyone remembers Dennis Pennis, but Paul Kay created this character who blurred the line between fiction and reality, and without him, there's no Office, there's no Ali G, and most, I think, young people would recognize him from Game of Thrones or as the psychologist in Ricky Gervais's Afterlife. So we've just had this very, very solemn day. It's been very quiet, and up rocks Paul. And he's like, I'm not going to try and do his accent, but he basically says, mate, I've got a couple of ideas. Tell me if I'm going too far. I love the scene, but I just thought I'd chuck a couple of jokes in. And he threw the two, like a scene which was brilliantly written, was hysterically funny. The two jokes that have survived into the edit, and one of them's in the trailer, were Paul Kay specials that he just came up with like that. I mean, to me, if you want a surprise, what an individual, what a genius Paul Kay is. The biggest challenge for me personally was that I was not prepared for how emotionally taxing the film was going to be, and that I was going to blub like an idiot so often and have my heart broken by the incredible performances of the actors. And I won't say COVID, but COVID was a challenge too. I gotta say, how effing good is Edinburgh? Like, legitimately. I am going to rent a kilt. I'm not shitting you. I'm renting a kilt for the closing night party. I think like every Aussie, as soon as I hear a Scottish accent, my brain, I want to brogue it out. I'm desperate to do a Scottish accent. I can't do it because I'll embarrass myself. But yeah, I just learnt, some amazing words like trews, which I didn't know, which are apparently tartan trousers for all you non-Scots out there. And the Edinburgh Film Festival has been a family. Everyone is incredibly kind. I think when we got the letter, asking us to bring our film to Edinburgh, Paul Ridd, the festival director, wrote just the most beautiful, I'm getting emotional talking about encapsulation of the film in an email, and I sent it to the entire cast and crew because it was so on point and was everything I wanted to say with the film. And what a buzz being here during the Fringe. I've always wanted to do it. So I have really struggled to go to bed on time, especially with the premiere coming tonight. But post-premiere, I'm definitely going to be tying one on and enjoying, the pub life of Edinburgh.